with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
And I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Thursday, May 11th, 2023. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Corbin Addison, author of Wastelands, the true story of farm country on trial. Meanwhile, CNN's town hall was predictably lie-filled. Embarrassing for the network. Total disaster. More on that in a bit. George Santos pleads not guilty to 13 counts. Guess we have to take him at his word. Not actually. Whatever is left of Dianne Feinstein returned to the Senate yesterday.
Oh boy.
I'm not trying to be glib, but man, it was not a pretty sight.
We're not the ones being glib, it's her staff and the party.
Exactly. I mean, nearly 3-month absence. She showed up, did not look great. Chuck Schumer walked in with her. Don't understand the desire to make this a photo op, but anyway, she was not present for the first Judiciary Committee vote this morning. And more information about her condition continues to trickle out. She allegedly confused Tim Scott for Raphael Warnock.
Yeah, she's about to break out like Wiggins in the playoffs.
Any day now. The COVID emergency and thus Title 42 expires tonight. Expect a temporary migrant surge and a right-wing freakout. Texas law enforcement promises to increase its brutality on that front under Operation Lone Star. Democrat Veronica Escobar in the House proposes ending sanctions to Venezuela and Cuba to, quote, stop the surge in migration. Or at least that's how the Washington Post quoted it. Hey, bad reasoning, but I will take it. Dozens of Palestinians killed in Israeli strikes in the last 2 days, including children. And Kevin McCarthy blocked Rashida Tlaib from recognizing Palestinian displacement yesterday in Congress. Bernie Sanders, the mensch that he is, hosted her in the Senate instead. The EPA announces regulations on greenhouse gas emissions from power plants. FDA shies away from over-the-counter birth control pills. Missouri is the latest state to ban transition care for minors. Daniel Perry, the man who killed BLM protester Garrett Foster, sentenced to 25 years. Greg Abbott still wants to pardon him. And lastly, Amazon gets $1 billion in tax breaks from Oregon for locating their data centers there. You know, good for them. They need it. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody.
You know what, just on that data centers and sort of state subsidy thing, the CHIPS Act, Intel has got a lot of money for the CHIPS Act.
Interesting.
And it's interesting watching, because I'm maybe looking in the next year or so upgrading my PC. And so I'm back on the computer CPU YouTubes. Mm-hmm. And even like on there, they're talking about like, yeah, Intel's basically trying to wait for long enough to where they can have accepted that CHIPS money, but also then fire a lot of people. So it's just like, man.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's a note that when you give corporate subsidies with no strings attached, that's what you get, right?
It's unbelievable.
And by the way, good job, everybody that, and I say this sarcastically, that was crapping on AOC for saying that we should not have the Amazon headquarters here, or if we were going to have it, we should not give them tax breaks. because they ended up building a smaller facility here anyway, and they just wanted to gouge whatever state that they could and hold their like massive economic power hostage, and she was proven immensely right.
Yeah, absolutely. There's certainly like dark days with regards to like the squad's relation to labor, like with the rail thing. But that was a big stand, and it was educational because that was a big con on the American people. It was Amazon basically getting free info on the infrastructure of any American city that had any kind of capacity, and then saying like, oh, okay, we're going to go with where we want to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember some family conversations, spirited ones, that, you know, I'm still waiting on that call from them that I was right in that situation, but, you know, never going to happen. It just speaks to my personal psychological issues. Anyway, let's talk about, speaking of personal psychological issues, they were on full display last night with Donald Trump. We're going to spend a good amount of time before we get to our guest here, Corbin Addison, speaking about the unmitigated disaster that was the CNN Trump Town Hall last night.
Trump Hall.
It's it, yeah.
Welcome to Trump Hall.
It's Trump Town and Trump Hall. I am the mayor. Excuse me. So here's an ancient history lesson. In 2016, after the network CNN continued to run Trump rallies and his empty podium uninterrupted, waiting with bated breath for the next crazy thing that he was going to say, not covering Bernie Sanders rallies, for example, but covering anything that Trump did, any event that he held, with completely breathlessly. Jeff Zucker, who was the head of CNN at the time, admitted that it was a, quote, mistake to have the coverage constructed in the way that they did.
Yeah, because he wants to get invited to parties.
Right. Well, and in 2016, that's what he had to say to get invited to parties. Right. And they were just allowing him to spew whatever lies he wanted via their network by just airing his rallies without...
was that presidential?
Exactly. And Zucker's no longer at the network 6-7 years later after he made that statement. Now it's Chris Licht, formerly of the Stephen Colbert CBS show. He is repeating Zucker's mistake so brazenly that it has to be deliberate, frankly. And there's been a lot of talk and rumors about CNN pushing itself towards the right deliberately. Now, I don't think Don Lemon is left-wing, but that was what he stated was part of the reason for his firing. And I do see that there's enough smoke out there from people who've left the network who are more critical of Trump. Harwood, Brian Stelter, who had some interesting intel from the meeting after this town hall, which we'll get to in a bit. But that this is a deliberate rightward shift for the network, that they're attempting to take a slice of the Fox News pie. So I'm starting to believe that where there's smoke, there's fire, and this is one of their latest moves in that vein. Now, a lot of people at CNN are not happy about this. They were sending out anonymous quotes to the media, to Justin Baragona of the Daily Beast, to the Washington Post media reporters, calling it awful, we're going to get crushed, a disaster. But this is coming from the top, clearly. And we're going to play a bunch of clips from this here. But I'll just say, Caitlin Collins, I think, did very poorly. She started off better with the election lies. But, you know, she is a Daily Caller reporter. That's how she got her start, ranking the hotness of Syrian refugees for Tucker Carlson's website. That should be instructive, that they're trying to platform a clearly conservative-leaning reporter in this area.
And she's most likely going to get the primetime evening slot.
Exactly.
Next,
so this is, again, another piece of evidence here.
Grooming that word has gotten a new connotation now, but they're...
Like the original version of the grooming.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
For a plum position.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and you always do it with somebody that you know is on your side, and then you make them look like something semi-respectable.
Exactly, and cable news has done this for a long time. I mean, like even
always from the right.
Always from the right. MSNBC people hiring Republicans that are just like mildly critical of Trump, and that's all you need. But even that for CNN, they feel that like they need to get some of the Trump audience back, and maybe they took a step forward last night. Because as much as I have problems with the meteoric rise of Caitlin Collins to this kind of position, it's more the format, frankly, that I have a problem with. You'll see this. The town hall format is like a get-to-know-you humanization format, where it's typically done by these outlets in primaries, meaning the audience is fully whatever the side is, Republican or Democrat. And you will see that the audience just laughs and cheers on Trump. And that has the effect of portraying to the people watching it that he has popular support behind those lies.
Yeah, and CNN's aware that the audience is part of the product here. And it's not just an accident. It's you do this and it is stated this way. You haven't
it's a conscious
seated
choice.
It half with people who are very upset about, like, say, January 6th, for instance.
Speaking of January 6th, that was part of the discussion last night. Here is the first clip we'll play for you. Trump was asked, this is at the start of the town hall, where Caitlin Collins was a little more aggressive about the election lies. And this was just a part of the many lies that he told last night.
President Trump, thank you for your time here tonight. We got a great crowd here in New Hampshire, a lot of voters with a lot of questions about what your 2024 term would look like, what another Trump term would look like. We'll get to the voters shortly, but your polls show that you are dominating the Republican race right now, but you are also under active federal investigation for trying to overturn the 2020 election results. Your first term ended with a deadly riot at the Capitol, and you still have not publicly acknowledged the 2020 election results. Why should Americans put you back in the White House?
Because we did fantastically. We got 12 million more votes than we had in, as you know, in 2016. I actually say we did far better in that election. Got the most that anybody's ever gotten.
But not the majority or the Electoral College.
This isn't like in Mario Kart where you run against your previous best time. You're running against another opponent, and just because you did better than you did last time, he did much better than the person you ran against last time, because in part, like how
everyone
animating
hated
you are.
Yeah, there was low turnout in 2016 because people did not like Hillary Clinton. There was higher turnout in 2020 because people hated you so much.
I beat my ghost. What?
Got 12 million more votes than we had in, as you know, in 2016. I actually say we did far better in that election. Got the most that anybody's ever gotten as a sitting president of the United States. I think that when you look at that result and when you look at what happened during that election, unless you're a very stupid person, you see what happens. A lot of the people in this audience, and maybe a couple that don't, but most people understand what happened. That was a rigged election, and it's a shame that we had to go through it. It's very bad for our country. All over the world, they looked at it, and they saw exactly what everyone else saw. You look, even if you just look recently with the 51 intelligence agents, that made a 16-point difference. If you look at the FBI, and Twitter, they call it Twitter files, made a big difference.
There we go.
If you look at
Mr. President,
Thanks,
to what you
Taibbi.
just said there, though, it was not a rigged election. It was not a stolen election. You and your supporters lost more than 60 court cases on the election. It's been nearly 2.5 years. Can you publicly acknowledge that you did lose the 2020 election?
Let me just go on. If you look at True the Vote, they found millions of votes on camera, on government cameras, where they were stuffing ballot boxes. So with all of that, I think it's a shame that what happened. I think it's a very sad thing for our country. I think it's a very sad thing, frankly, for the world, because if you look at what's gone to our country has gone to hell. Our borders are bad. Our military has been bad.
Great job by Collins.
You look at the taxes, you look at inflation, what's happened to inflation. It's just destroying our country.
All right, so that was really that's literally the beginning of it.
And just to give you some context, guys, on True the Vote.
I was about to say
True
that,
the Vote, the voter integrity organization, where two of their leaders of that organization were literally put in jail by a federal judge for acting in contempt of court. Like, like in October of last year. So even bringing up True the Vote
and they just hired
the underpinning of his evidence should tell you something right out the gate.
And they just hired a QAnon influencer to do their radio show for True the Vote. So like, I mean, this is the kind of waters that we're swimming in here. He goes on to like lie about how he tried to get the National Guard on January 6th. There's more where he talks about how it's a beautiful day. But like that original part, the election was really the only part where she even had some meaningful pushback, and then it began to dissolve from there.
That's such a dangerous piece of propaganda there, because all you had, I didn't see much from Collins there at all. The biggest reaction to what Trump was saying was from the audience.
Yes.
And it was affirming what he said.
Saying that, you actually do have to be stupid to not believe that the election was rigged.
Which is just like malpractice by Collins and CNN to let that go out.
Well, I mean, and I'll also say that what her focus seemed to be was to pin him down on specific policy proposal that he wants to do, as opposed to in real time, like calling him out on his lies. But at the same time, part of me wants to say we need to have a conversation about not just fact checking, because I think there's a lot of hubris that the media assigns to their role in fact checking. It's about platforming more than anything, and what you choose to focus. It's not the nature focus on or highlight. It's not the nature of what even you say sometimes in those instances, especially with a serial liar like this guy who has a cult following. It is the act of putting on this program. But they knew that. They knew they would get big ratings here.
The thing is, like, it's the program, and it's like this would have been, I think, worthwhile television if Collins was prepared to stay on that point for the entirety of the thing, if Trump wouldn't relent on that, and actually be a journalist and stand up for the truth on the matter, rather than just let him filibuster. And but instead they have business to get to. We need to talk about all this other stuff. We need to talk to Trump about. We got all these other subjects in the clips.
And later on, about the election stuff, he literally says to her, like, I actually don't think you're too smart to actually believe that the election wasn't rigged. But you have an agenda because you work for CNN.
Right.
So it's like all of it comes back to being like, even if you're saying it, you're a liar. I'm not lying, and you're either an idiot or a mark if you are saying what is actually true.
Well, part of what they also wanted to get to, again, at the expense of actually like nailing him on something, is the fact that just days ago he was found liable in a sexual abuse and defamation case. And honestly, the way Carroll's lawyer should like bring a second defamation case in this instance, because just within days, this is what Trump is saying about her. And good job, CNN, putting a sexual abuse victim on display here for jeers from a right-wing base.
Usually you leave office, you say, I'm sorry, but I'm going back home. I'm back home to my family and everything. I'm going to be resigning. My poll numbers went up, and they went up with the other fake charge, too. Because what's happening is they're doing this for election interference. This woman, I don't know her. I never met her. I have no idea who she is. I had a picture taken years ago with her and her husband, nice guy, John Johnson. He was a newscaster, a very nice man. She called him an ape. Happens to be African American. Called him an ape. The judge wouldn't allow us to put that in. Her dog or her cat was named Vagina. The judge wouldn't allow to put that in. All of these things. But with her, they could put in anything. Access,
this
Hollywood.
This was a jury of 9 people who found you liable of sexual abuse. Do you think that will deter women from voting for you?
No, I don't think so, because I think the whole thing, just so you understand, ready?
Ready.
I never met this woman. I never saw this woman. This woman said, I met her at the front door of Bergdorf Goodman, which I rarely go into other than for a couple of charities. I met her in the front door.
He doesn't do his own shopping.
She was about 60 years old, and this is like 22, 23 years ago. I met her in the front door of Bergdorf Goodman. I was immediately attracted to her, and she was immediately attracted to me. And we had this great chemistry. We're walking into a crowded department store. We had this great chemistry, and a few minutes later, we end up in a room, a dressing room of Bergdorf Goodman, right near the cash register.
They're
and
laughing.
Then she found out there were locks on the door. So she said, I found one that was open. She found one. She learned this at trial. She found one that was open. What kind of a woman meets somebody and brings them up, and within minutes
This is
you're
disgusting.
playing hanky-panky in a dressing room, okay? I don't know if she was married then or not. John Johnson, I feel sorry for you, John Johnson.
Mr. President, can I...
I mean, the laughter in the audience as he victim blames. What kind of woman does this? I don't know, Donald. All the women that you've probably banged.
Great husband.
I mean, literally anybody, dude. Like, this is classic misogyny. I mean, really deeply embedded stuff where these men want to be as sexually promiscuous as they want, but if a woman decides that she wants to engage with him, well, she's a slut. And what kind of woman does that? And in this instance, she was not consenting. She was not consenting in this instance. There's like a clip floating around of Trump, like, in Bergdorf Goodman doing some special for them saying, I come here all the time. Like, it doesn't matter. Just running through these lies here. He calls E. Jean Carroll a whack job later. But again, putting more smears against a victim of sexual abuse on display for the CNN audience. And it just gets worse. Let's do this Roe v. Wade. This was the thing that really bothered me. So I'm like, I'm watching the Knick game in the background, also trying to watch this. I watched a lot of it this morning as well. And this still sticks out to me as the thing that's the most infuriating here because we're getting into policy implications. And this is Trump speaking about abortion, where he lies specifically about the Democratic position with zero pushback from Caitlin Collins, just none.
The way I look, I think it's very important to say this. I consider the other side to be radical because the other side, under Roe v. Wade and other things, the other side, they're radical because they will. Remember the debate with Hillary Clinton? I said, rip the baby out of the womb at the end of the 9th month. They will kill the baby in the 9th month. If you look at that crazy governor of Virginia from the former governor, where he said, no, the baby will be born, and then we'll decide essentially whether or not to execute the baby.
But, Mr. President, can we talk about what you would do if you are
reelected? No, but these are the radical people.
Reelected.
It's not the pro-life people that are radical.
But if you are reelected and you're back in the Oval Office and you get legislation to your desk, would you sign a federal abortion ban into law?
What I'll do is negotiate so that people are happy. But the fact that I was able, I'm so proud of it. We put 3 great justices on the Supreme Court. We have almost 300 federal judges on the Supreme Court.
So just to be clear, Mr. President, you would sign a federal abortion ban into law.
I said this. I want to do what's right, and we're looking, and we want to do what's right for everybody.
But what's right?
But now, for the first time, the people that are pro-life have negotiating capability because you didn't have it before. They could kill the baby in the 9th month or after the baby was born. Now they won't be able to do that.
But I think this is a really important question for you to answer because this is something every Republican, including those who are running against you for the nomination, are being asked about is, would you sign a federal abortion ban into law?
And many of them are going to give you the same answer as I am. First of all, I am honored to have done what I did. And a lot of people said in 150 years, he's now the most consequential president because he saved so many lives. And I'm honored to have done it.
Applause. All right, so that's literally the exact issue I had with the way that she conducted this. I mean, it's not an accident that she was chosen for this. But at the same time, they're trying to put women in these positions to pin him down on things like, rape lawsuits and abortion bans. I don't really care what his policy platform position is on abortion because it's just going to be what he decides at the moment and what's the most extreme thing that he can get away with while appealing to his right-wing base and getting it through Congress, if he were to be president, God forbid, getting it through the Senate and the House in terms of an abortion ban. There's no question that given the constituencies that are behind Trump, that they would attempt a federal abortion ban when he was in office because the guy has no principles. It's not about nailing down what he would or wouldn't do because that's incredibly fungible. It's about the lies, about how doctors and Democrats want to execute babies outside of the womb. 90% of abortions happen before that 12-week period. The rest that happen after that are usually soon after that or when the life of the mother is in jeopardy and there are medical issues. That's when the 7, 8, 9-month abortion happens. Like, those are very, very narrow situations, and it's because of medical circumstances. And there's just like, that's one of the easiest fact checks that you could use in that. Again, I hate the term fact check, but that's one of the easiest layups for her, and she didn't even do that.
But I also think like the other thing that makes this to me almost completely valueless is like, I think we can get to it for a sec, the Chris Licht being like,
yes, let's put that up.
This is valuable because he's the front runner or whatever. It's like, yeah, but he's a front runner who literally he's what he does is he's a gish scalper in the almost like the highest sense of the term, and that he doesn't let you catch your breath to account for the 500 false things that he said. If you actually wanted to do like a comprehensive fact check or whatever, or annotate his remarks, the entire thing, as Matt said, it would take you all day. There's no value to this being an hour of him going through issues and lying about every single thing that he's saying.
Well, there's value from ratings.
That's what it is. That's fundamentally.
Let's pull that
But
up.
I think like, yeah, you're a major network and you should have like the guy on. But like, there's this Ben Rhodes quote, and we'll get to Stelter here. But Ben Rhodes, former Obama, I believe, foreign policy guy. Yeah. Most of the outlets are reporting on world events from Washington. The average reporter we talk to is 27 years old, and their only reporting experience consists of being around political campaigns. It's a sea change. They literally know nothing. I looked at Caitlin Collins' Wikipedia to try to figure out
she's 31. Why
a corporation of CNN's caliber would put someone like her in this position, and there's no like real rationale for that besides just like they'd like having somebody like I don't know, honestly, like why? Like there's nobody in your stable of journalists that can do a better job on this than Collins, because she was not competent here.
No, she wasn't, and I think that the friendly nature of it, the pushback, but within narrow confines, was the point. Even though he repeatedly called her nasty, I mean that's his go-to for any woman that bothers him. But this is what Stelter, who has recently been let go from CNN, as again part of their clear rightward shift here, says Chris Licht, the new head of CNN, begins CNN's 9 a.m. editorial call by praising Caitlin Collins for her masterful performance last night. He says, quote, "I couldn't be more proud of her and the whole team in New Hampshire." Then he says he's aware of the backlash, more to come. Stelter continues, the quote from Licht here. "You do not have to like the former president's answers, but you can't say that we didn't get them," Licht tells staffers. Who cares about the answers?
On the campaign trail too.
Good, you guys got the lies. Incredible. Many of whom are angry about the town hall. The staffers, as I mentioned, have been upset. Caitlin pressed him again and again and made news. Made a lot of news, and that is our job.
Press him, like, be specific. Name a specific time you're proud of.
Yeah, I mean, your job is not to make news. It's about well, I guess, reporting the news. Now you guys are the news that people are reporting on. While we all may have been uncomfortable hearing people clapping, that was also an important part of the story, Licht adds, because those folks represent, quote, a large swath of America, and the media screwed up by missing that part of the story in 2015, 2016.
Oh, fuck off.
Yeah, I mean, and lauding that kind, again, as if Licht has any idea about the kind of America that he's opining about there. Covering Trump is, quote, tricky and messy, Licht says, and it will, quote, continue to be messy and tricky, but it's our job. He confidently says, America was served very well by what we did last night. Many CNN employees strongly disagree.
And the media is complicit in this too. The Hill, Caitlin, all the headlines, or a lot of them, are supportive of Collins, or make it like Trump snaps at CNN's Caitlin Collins. You're a nasty person. New York Times, Caitlin Collins in a white suit takes on Trump.
Oh yeah, we get it. The callback to Hillary.
But that's what it was. But the other stuff of this, all of it, as you say, I mean, Matt, it's all of this it's me. All of it becomes media critique. All of it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We're promoting Caitlin Collins. Let's put her in this position so she debates Trump, and then we tell everyone on staff. We issue a press release. Caitlin Collins did great. Caitlin Collins did great against Trump. Now she's the 9 p.m. anchor. All of this stuff has one way or another a profit motive and a motive to platform to make CNN the news. To not actually report on anything is to make CNN the center of the story, because nothing else in this business is profitable. There's literally zero other profit element besides making the fucking corporation the story.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You're right. All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk to Corbin Addison. back, and we are joined now by Corbin Addison, best-selling author of Wastelands, the true story of farm country on trial. Corbin, thank you so much for coming on today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So, the topic that you cover here, and it really reads almost like a legal thriller. I've seen other people describe it as such, but it's a true story, which is amazing. But it really does hit home for me because back at my old gig when I was, kind of cosplaying as a reporter, it was truly one of the most impactful things I did is, or at least I hope so, was we covered this family in rural Delaware. We did a series of interviews with them, and they were suffering severe health problems, cancer, amputations, hair loss, death prematurely. And it was from Mount Air Farms, which is a major chicken processor. And they were spraying waste everywhere. They got their water from well water. They were a black family that had been there for generations. And they ended up getting a settlement, but it just highlights how widespread this problem is. Rural communities at the front lines of this kind of pollution from meat processing. And you tell this story in depth, and it's a David versus Goliath story with a happy ending, at least in terms of getting a settlement.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's a fascinating story and one that I was not aware of. I mean, it's horrifying. One of the things that was hard about Wastelands is that there were a lot of health effects, for the people living next door to these industrial hog farms, with thousands and thousands of animals cooped up in barns, storing the waste of small cities in a cesspool outside, open to the air, and then spraying it onto nearby fields. But, from a legal standpoint, it's much harder to prove those sorts of health effects when you're dealing with asthma and hypertension and mood disorders and depression and whatnot, than it is to just say, hey, look, they're being a bad neighbor. They're making, life obnoxious for us living next door. And that's ultimately what the lawyers decided to do is to use the 400-year-old concept of nuisance, going back to the English common law, which just says, look, you can't unreasonably interfere with your neighbor's use and enjoyment of their property. And that should apply equally to large scale industrial, agricultural and animal operations as much as it does to you and me. So that's where, they brought the claims and they were successful in narrowing it down and focusing it. I appreciate the mention about the way it reads. I mean, certainly I wrote the book with Jonathan Harr as a civil action in both the back of my mind and just over my shoulder on the shelf. That was one of the reasons I went to law school. I read his phenomenal book back in the 90s, the true story about a big environmental litigation. I thought, you know what, if Jonathan Harr can sell a story like this, so can I. And that was my intention. So I'm glad that people have found the book easy to digest and read.
Yeah, I mean, it really is that, as you describe. And it's a story of environmental racism, of monopolies, and of a legal fight as well. But I wanted to rewind before we get to the litigation in and of itself to talk about the history of hog farming in Eastern North Carolina, which you cover and write about, and how it was this tobacco land beforehand, but very quickly became an area of the country where massive meat packing companies made their home to the detriment of the people in the area. If you could just go through the history of that for our audience.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, it's a fascinating story and one that I knew nothing about. I mean, I don't come from a rural part of the country. I come from the megapolis of Southern California. So, going down east, the way they call it locally in North Carolina felt in some ways like traveling to another country. I mean, it truly feels like a world apart. And it is. I mean, it has its own culture. It has its own kind of demographic, and one that maps onto its history quite clearly. So this was for 250 years the world of the Brightleaf Tobacco Belt. So, what the economy was, King Tobacco built until the 1950s when tobacco hit an economic slide and a lot of tobacco farmers struggled to make ends meet, and they were looking for a way to keep their family farms. I mean, a lot of them, had been on this land themselves for a long, long time. I mean, we're not talking at this point about just big plantations, but small family farms, and they were struggling economically. So they were looking for a savior. Some sold out, some took government buyouts to stop, producing tobacco. Others looked for some way to diversify, and in stepped a guy named Wendell Murphy. So Wendell came from Rose Hill, a tiny town in eastern North Carolina. He had already built what became the world's largest feed mill. He got into the hog business back when they were just, hogs on the ground, like an old McDonald's farm. And he had a herd that he was feeding with his own, stock, his own feed, until they got cholera. And he actually had to euthanize all of his animals, quarantine the dirt. And it was at that point that he had, a choice. Should he just walk away and focus on the feed mill, or was there some other way to make money off of hogs? And he actually looked to the west toward Don Tyson, who had revolutionized poultry about 10 years before by basically handing out contracts to other farmers to grow Don Tyson's birds. And that's how corporate poultry farming was created. And Wendell Murphy thought, okay, hogs are much bigger animals, but what if we put them indoors, in barns? And what if I handed out contracts to all these tobacco farmers and they could just grow my animals on their land? They've got a ton of, a land that's basically fallow right now, and they're desperate for a way to stay in business. So it seemed like a perfect kind of dovetail. And it was, I mean, in many ways for, the tobacco farmers and Wendell Murphy, it was a marriage of great, joy and convenience. And Wendell Murphy became, a hero in eastern North Carolina to everyone other than one constituency whose, permission was never asked, whose opinion was never asked. And when they chose to volunteer it, they were ignored because of basically who they are. And that is the neighbors of these hog operations, the folks that were living, near the land, in and around the tobacco land, were in many cases the heirs of formerly enslaved peoples. So, mostly Black folks of modest means who have ties to the land going back generations. They just don't have political power and never have in eastern North Carolina or in the state of North Carolina or really across the entire South. And as a result of that, when they complained, and a few of them did, had that temerity to stand up to the Wendell Murphy's juggernaut, they just got ignored. And they got ignored over the course of the next 30 years until the lawyers stepped up and decided to file a lawsuit.
And how much of this, too, was the fact that these hog companies, right, the hog farms, became incredibly industrial monopolies as well, very rapidly. What was that shift like, and how quickly did it become just a handful of mega corporations, including the one that ended up getting sued, Smithfield Foods?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. I mean, the 90s was, of course, an era of consolidation across, all sorts of different industries. And so in the 1990s, there was just a series of mergers. I mean, in the early part of the 90s, the 80s and early 90s, there were, in eastern North Carolina, they called them the five families, which, of course, harkens back to the five families of the New York Mafia. It's fascinating. There were five companies that were owned by families, including Murphy's company, which was by far the largest in eastern North Carolina. But then they started dropping. So, Murphy became, by 1997, when he landed on the cover of Forbes magazine, he was the world's largest, not just America's largest producer of porcine stock. And there were a couple of other smaller companies as well that then were gobbled up. And in 1999, Smithfield Foods, which was Murphy's, basically his mirror on the packing side, the largest packer of pork in the world, Joe Luter bought out Murphy. And I mean, there was a merger, but it basically was a buyout. And Smithfield then became the largest producer and packer of pork in the world. And then it was that way for a while, but Luter was in the same way that, Murphy was. He never saw an opportunity he didn't want to take. He never thought that, the sky was ever the limit. Everything bigger was better. he looked to the final frontier of pork, which is China. China is the world's largest consumer of pork products. And they even have a national pork reserve, like we have a national petroleum reserve. It's a big security issue, food security issue for China. And Luter had a counterpart over there by the name of Wan Long, who ran a company called Shuangwei, which controlled China's national pork reserve and was the largest packer of pork in the world and shipped it in a lot of other places, around the world, as well as providing it to, the Chinese folks. And Luter really wanted to do a sort of transnational merger, and Wan Long resisted that. But in 2013, after Luter stepped down, and his successor Larry Pope was in the CEO's chair at Smithfield, in 2013, Wan Long came back with a buyout offer for Smithfield, which was $7 billion. It was 30% above the market capitalization of Smithfield, and it was financed by a $4 billion loan from the government-backed Bank of China, which was approved by the Chinese in a single day. So you're talking about a tremendous amount of political pressure on Wan Long in order to get this done, and the support of the Chinese Communist Party and the government. And it was a really interesting thing because politically here in the U.S., people saw, look, this is the largest potential buyout of an American company by a Chinese company in history. And doesn't this raise some national security concerns? This isn't about jingoism. This is just about, like, how do we protect our own food supply in the United States? There was a hearing in Congress, and it went, the way that hearings in Congress very often go when you have a massive company that wants to do something, and
they were offering
the company gets their way.
Yeah, the 30% over the price that was, I guess, expected is the tax to probably circumvent some of the concerns that you describe, which, maybe. Right? It's just like, hey, let's get this done. Let's make them an offer that they can't refuse, essentially.
Oh, absolutely. And, what was interesting is it came out later that the concerns that, some thoughtful people had about this buyout were correct, that in fact, the 12-year plan, the 5-year plan that came out in 2012 from China actually really encouraged the acquisition of overseas farmland and also biotechnology. So really what China wanted out of Smithfield was their technology. And this is really, gets to the heart of Wastelands in the story. They wanted to be able to continue to produce pork at the lowest possible rate. And ironically, in China, the lagoon and spray field system is not legal. So
wow,
it's actually easier and cheaper for North Carolina to spray hog crap on its neighbors than it is for Chinese, pork producers to make bacon over there.
Well, that doesn't entirely shock me, given the state of kind of crony capitalism in this country. And
No.
I wanted to take, that was going to be my next question. Just if you could explain the lagoons, the technology used, and how insane it is, the amount of waste that they have essentially just poured into an environment, and an environment there that also has a ton of water, rivers, streams. It's quite flat, so it's very susceptible to pollution in the same way. If you don't mind explaining their process.
Yeah, sure. So, look, when Wendell Murphy put these hogs in barns, he put 1,200 inside one shed, and then, multiply the sheds in order to multiply, the throughput. And some of these hog farms have 10 or 15 barns. You're talking about, you could have 15,000 animals on, one piece of property, and each hog produces the waste of 5 humans. So if you've got, 5,000 animals, then that's the waste of 25,000 humans, a small city, and if you've got 15,000 animals, you're talking about the waste of 75,000 human beings. So you've got to do something with that. This isn't the days of yore where hogs do their business on the ground and, rut around and, in the ground. You're talking about thousands and thousands of animals. So their idea was, look, the cheapest possible way is just to use the cesspool technology, if you can call it that humans have used for a long time for a lot of different reasons, including our own waste in rural settings. So they just took backhoes and dug big pits in the earth and, right next to the hog sheds, and then just, flush the hog waste out. So the way that, that works in the barns is the hogs stand on concrete slats and the waste falls through. I mean, a lot of it, sadly, because these barns are not kept very clean and hogs just do their business all day, every day. A lot of the floors just look like they're standing in hog waste and rolling around in hog waste. You kind of can't believe how disgusting it is inside a lot of these hog sheds. But the waste that then falls through the slats gets flushed out by water through pipes into these open air cesspools. And, you're talking about the volume of 10 Olympic-sized swimming pools or 40 water towers. I mean, like 250,000 gallons each. These are massive, massive cesspools. And then, the challenge, of course, is that if they're open to the air, not only are you constantly flushing the waste out of the hogs coming through the barns, every 5 months, there's a new crop of hogs and they're producing waste every single day. But then you've got, rainfall coming from, overhead and from the sky. So that then adds to the volume, and you've got, in a cesspool, a finite volume. So they then, the industry had to figure out, what do you do with, with the volume when it reaches the berm, because the permit says you can't, let it go over. So they then invented these giant, I call them Jurassic-sized lawn sprinklers. I mean, they're basically like waste cannons that you hook up with, by a fire hose to a pump, and just shoot this stuff out, into the air, high overhead.
I saw this in Delaware too, with the chicken waste. It's unbelievable. It looks like a sprinkler, right? It looks like they're sprinkling or like tending to the field, but they're literally spraying waste.
Yeah, and with hog waste, because they've got so much of it, actually, what they would do, I mean, it actually looks like, I mean, if you imagine, a 5-alarm fire and the way that, the fire department would spray with the big hoses, this giant rooster tail of water up into a building to put out a fire, it's that volume of hog waste being sprayed out 100 feet in the air. I mean, it's a surreal, I mean, the way that they did this, and then without any concern whatsoever. I mean, none for the neighbors. And in some cases, even in litigation, you're talking about, this is 13, 14, 15, 16. They were taking these pictures and videos. They were still spraying with these giant big guns directly toward these houses. I mean, not like a fire hose directed at somebody's window, but I mean, right up into the air in the field next door, such that the wind just, picks it up and it drifts on the breeze. So you asked about the technology. I mean, how does a cesspool work? It's basically just, they call it anaerobic digestion. I mean, it's just the way that nature treats waste, except in this case, you've got so much of it and it's so concentrated and it's not going to go away. I mean, it's not like it's, the way waste gets treated by the forest floor. I mean, that's a natural process where everything biodegrades and it goes back into nature and becomes, food for, plants and whatnot. You're talking about such a volume of feces and urine coming from these animals that there's nothing that you can do with it. There's no way that you can turn it into, usable fertilizer, no matter how much the industry says, oh, we have a waste utilization plan. I mean, in reality, they're just trying to get rid of it as fast as they can, and they spray it all the time. And in fact, there have been countless violations that have been documented where they're spraying when they shouldn't, spraying toward, rivers and streams. You mentioned, I mean, Eastern North Carolina is the remnants of an ancient sea. It's a coastal plain. It's loamy soil. This is like, there's tons of runoff. And I mean, it's been proven, goes into the rivers and streams. And when there's a hurricane, all of these things overflow. 2,000 cesspools, more than that, of that volume across Eastern North Carolina. And when Florence came through and Floyd 20 years before, I mean, you've got, billions of gallons of hog waste flowing into these beautiful rivers, killing fish, coming out in plumes into the intercoastal waterway. I mean, boaters have seen plumes of hog waste after hurricanes and storms. I mean, it's surreal. It's like you look at it and you're like, wait a minute, is this really 2023? And are we really handling waste in this way? Like, is this 100 years ago? Because we used to do this with human waste, in a smaller volume. We had open sewers. It was uncivilized. And then one day we said, you know what, we're tired of this and we need to actually civilize our waste production and waste management. And no, they haven't done it with animals.
This is what deregulation looks like, really. I mean, this is what happens when you have a libertarian utopia, and it's the desire you allow industry to run rampant in this way. I mean, talk a bit about the actual, now that we have a clear picture of how insane and disgusting these practices are. Like, what are the specific health problems that were faced by the residents as a result of all of this waste being exposed to them for so many years?
Yeah, I mean, there are just a lot of breathing problems. I mean, so one woman whose house is right next door, to a spray field, I mean, just developed terrible asthma, and just, I mean, she struggled to breathe for a long, long time. There have been heart issues like hypertension. The experience of these people talked about, especially at the, back in the height of this in the 1990s and the 2000s, of waking up at night in their own bedroom and finding themselves overwhelmed by a stench that, and it's not just a stench like that's just offensive to smell, but it gets into your nose and into your soft tissue, your nose and throat. It burns almost like a light acid. And it makes the air just inhospitable. You don't want to breathe it. I mean, one woman told me a story of waking up at night multiple times, and of course her windows are open. They don't, these folks don't have air conditioning. They have God's air conditioning. They open their windows. They let the breeze come in. And with the breeze, if they're spraying next door, comes the hog waste. And so, this woman, told me about waking up at night and having to flee her bedroom. But where do you go? Because it's everywhere. It's inside her house and all of her rooms. And of course, it's outside. So there's no way that she could actually get away from it. I mean, it just followed her everywhere. I mean, the consequences for people's quality of life and their own conception of the land. I mean, this is their ancestral land. The dirt beneath their feet is their most valuable asset. Personally, their most valuable resource. And to have it polluted like this, I mean, in that same woman who told me the story about waking up at night, I mean, she had to padlock her wells because the well water got polluted. And I mean, you talked about that with poultry farmers. I mean, it's, this stuff gets into the groundwater. It's not supposed to. And yet, one of the people that testified in the trials is this heroic hog farmer who was willing to testify against his own interest and against his own bosses, the only hog farmer in the entire state of North Carolina who is still under contract and was willing to testify. His name is Tom Butler, and he's one of my heroes. And he talks about how, look, these lagoons, they were designed for 30 years. A lot of them are unlined. It's just clay. And they seep into the groundwater. I mean, this stuff is getting out. Now, the industry says, no, it's not. Please don't say that because, that's illegal. But he said everyone knows it's happening. And these lagoons were designed for 30 years, and most of them are reaching the end of their life cycle. And what then? I mean, it's not like we're going to dig a new pit in the earth and transfer the waste. It's just, this is an environmental disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah, I mean, and it did happen, obviously.
Yes, and it has happened before.
Yeah, and now, like, I guess we can begin kind of talking about the residents filing suit against Smithfield Foods. Spoiler alert, they win after 7 years of litigation. Take us through that process and how that began, what really stuck out to you in researching this for your book.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm a lawyer by training. I worked in litigation and in the court system and the federal courts, so it was really natural for me to work on this story and to bring it to life. I mean, the law can be boring, but the law can also be incredibly dramatic when you have amazing people going up against a gigantic corporation and actually bringing justice to the courthouse, notwithstanding the pushback from an industry that was basically owned the legislature and was able to get special laws passed to try to kill the litigation in the process. And I mean, the level of the rallying that went on, the PR push, millions of dollars to create a grassroots organization to oppose the litigation, all this funded by industry, rallying the thousands of hog growers and families, and, to make it like, look, these out-of-state trial lawyers are trying to take down the farm families in North Carolina, which is what Smithfield, the Chinese-owned multi-billion-dollar behemoth, was, that was their tagline. We're standing for family farmers, and these out-of-state trial lawyers who also happen to be from North Carolina, are trying to take down the poor family farmers from Eastern North Carolina. It's just wild. I mean, the level of lying, the level of deception, the level, of corporate capture of a legislature, and all that's, told. It was so much fun to write it into the story, because the drama was all real. I mean, I wasn't having to make any of it up, but I often thought as a novelist, I couldn't make up anything better. I mean, it just it's surreal. So yeah, the origin story of the litigation is, Smithfield had agreed in 2000, after Hurricane Floyd blew through and dumped many feet of rain and flooded all of these lagoons and killed billions of fish in the Neuse River and others from these plumes of hog waste flowing down into the beautiful Albemarle and Pamlico Sounds inside the Outer Banks. Smithfield had been forced by the state to invest in new technology. They invested in it. The scientists developed it, and then Smithfield torpedoed it after spending a mere $25 million. After a decade, technologies developed to replace lagoons and spray fields, but Smithfield uses a technicality in the agreement with the state AG to shut it down, and it was never deployed. It was considered economically infeasible because it was $1 more expensive than the medieval lagoons and spray fields. So Smithfield was able to basically, win this, this political contest and shut everything down. The media had gone away. The state, the governor, the legislature was basically in the pocket of industry. So, the neighbors, they knew that their only hope was to get a lawyer to represent them in the courthouse. The challenge was, what lawyer worth their salt would take on a multi-billion-dollar behemoth like this that has so much political power. You're just going to be flushing your career, your law firm down the toilet, and nobody wanted to touch it. Nobody wanted to come near it until one day in 2013, it just so happened that these folks connected with the one lawyer in North Carolina. I mean, really, the one lawyer who would have been able to take this on. Her name's Mona Lisa Wallace, and she's really the star of Wastelands, one of the stars. And she's a really remarkable woman. I mean, she came from a working class family in a multiracial area. She was a graduate from her newly desegregated high school in Salisbury, North Carolina, and has always had a real heart for racial issues and environmental causes. And she was successful in going up against a number of polluting industries in the past. And so when she heard about this, she was like, I'm disgusted this is happening in my state. I know it's going to cost a ton of money, millions of dollars. I know that I, have no idea if we'll ever get any of that back. But I just can't see this happening in North Carolina. Like, somebody needs to stand up and go toe to toe with this industry. She agreed. She basically took it on in 2013, and it did, as you mentioned, it took 7 years. Went through 5 federal trials in Raleigh in 2018 and 19. She brought on board one of the best trial attorneys in the country, Mike Heskey, to handle the cases in front of the jury. Mike is an incredible person, and he also is a star in Wastelands. It was so much fun to get to know him. Mona had she's got a small firm. It's a very family firm. So her daughter was part of the litigation team. Her nephew was part of the litigation team. And the other lawyers that work with her, just a handful of them, really, it's like a family. And so they became extremely close to the 500 plaintiffs that they represented from 26 communities. They brought 26 cases. These are called mass actions, not a class action. So they have to manage all 500 plaintiffs as individual clients. And they had 26 cases that they were managing with these a small firm, Mona's firm, and then Mike is basically a solo practitioner. And they had a little bit of help, but it truly was a David versus Goliath story, because Smithfield hired one of the biggest law firms in the world, 1,000 attorneys, McGuire Woods, to represent them. And they had, parachutes for pockets, as I put it in the book, and spent tens of millions of dollars. Nobody knows how much, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was north of $50 million on the litigation. And, all to basically try to stave off these black people from saying, hey, look, you've been polluting our land for 30 years. Just stop it. Just stop. Just clean up. We don't want you to go out of business. We don't want you to stop making bacon. Just make it in a cleaner way. And frankly, honor the promise you made back in 2000 to replace lagoons and spray fields. Just use the new tech that you paid to develop. You're just going to cost a little bit more, maybe a lot more initially, but you need to do it because it's a cost that should be on your bottom line and not borne by society. That really was the fundamental argument. And in the end, the jury, I wish I could play for you and your audience. I mean, that I've got this presentation that I do when I speak about this. And I mean, it's just the videos, the pictures are just overwhelming. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The jury got to see it. And so it wasn't entirely surprising that they responded the way they did.
And just to put a button on this before I let you go, Corbin, how did they respond? Like, what was the monetary compensation in the end of this?
Yeah, so the third trial of the 5 delivered the largest verdict in North Carolina history. So of the 500 plaintiffs, it was just 8 people, 8 neighbors in one neighborhood, and it was nearly $500 million in mostly punitives. I mean, so basically the jury was saying to Smithfield, stop it, cut it out. Like, we don't have the ability to force you to get rid of these lagoons and spray fields, but we're going to make you feel a world of hurt for having done what you've done. And really, that third trial in many ways, is the sort of culmination of the story as I tell it, though there were 2 trials afterward that, ultimately precipitated a settlement. Unfortunately, the settlement was confidential. I don't know how much it is, but I know Mona and Mike really well. And I can tell you that with 500 plaintiffs, you're talking about a lot of money. I know that, they got compensation. I don't know how much, but I do know that it was transformative for some of these folks, in really beautiful ways, sending kids to college, making improvements on homes that desperately needed it, allowing for retirement for some people who probably wouldn't have been able to retire. They didn't get rich and didn't want to get rich from this settlement. But ultimately what they wanted is for the industry to change. So the industry is now, starting to see the light. But unfortunately, and, your politics podcast, I mean, at the end of the day, like, this is a political problem, and the solution has to be in the legislature. Cory Booker's got a great law called the Farm System Reform Act that, if we could get Congress to be sensible, would actually rein in corporate, companies like Smithfield, these large-scale agricultural companies across the board, not just in pork, and really require some meaningful regulation and some changes in the way that our meat is produced in the United States, changes that would make it more humane and more humane for the neighbors and more humane for the animals, and ultimately be better for all of us. But right now, we have corporate capture in the United States of America, and it is a challenge.
You're right. I keep, returning to just, we could just regulate this, as opposed to having to have these punctuated moments in history where you have class action suits or mass action suits that result in companies essentially having to pay fines, but nothing structurally changes. And I think that's a great lesson to take away from this. Corbin Addison,
absolutely.
The book is Wastelands, The True Story of Farm Country on Trial. We'll put a link to your book in the descriptions everywhere you're listening to or watching this. Corbin, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Emma. Take care.
Take care. All right, guys, with that, we are going to wrap up the first hour of this program, head into the fun half. The number is 646-257-3920. We'll take your calls, read your IMs. Matt, what's happening in Left Reckoning Land?
We had Gus Bova to talk about, more corporate malfeasance, and this in the case of Elon Musk basically having contractors die of heat stroke, and maybe we don't report that to the state, even though they've given us specific carve-outs and good deals in part.
But that didn't engender goodwill?
it's it didn't. It turns out that like bringing all these good jobs and it's the future of industry. It actually means abusing contractors. So and then we also talked to Harvey K, who is writing speeches for Marianne Williamson. And we talked a little bit about that. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning for that.
Kowalski said, I like this interview. If you read this in time, please let your guest know. I'm sorry, I didn't read it in time. But yeah, I mean, it's I appreciate the I am. But yeah, the whole, I mean, we saw this with Aaron Brockovich. Like, this is a tale as old as time. Flint. Whatever it is, I mean, that's a little bit more, literally structural, but the corporate capture in that story as well. But anyway, so on ESVN, we spoke about the playoffs. We talked about Dylan Brooks and the Memphis Grizzlies kind of unprecedentedly coming out and really trying to dampen the market for him when he becomes a free agent. We spoke about the NHL playoffs as well. YouTube.com/ESVN show. And we have Brandon soon. He's
hello,
here.
hello.
There
Sorry,
he is.
everyone, for having my hand on the mic. I need to get a new mic stand, but that's coming.
You sound good. Coming. It sounds good, so.
Glad to hear it.
Okay.
Can you hear it, Brandon? Just continue the count just to make sure we don't have a delay. 1, 2, 3.
Oh no, there was no delay. I just did that.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
That was all me. No, I just left
that was a psyop.
Yeah, I mean, man, you're just like completely messing with our heads here. But
that was a power play. Dead air is a power play.
Totally. If you speak first, you lose in negotiations. I've heard that before.
Exactly.
So what's happening over on the discourse, Brandon?
Yes, so you can tell I'm excited because I actually have some recording done. I was able to meet, it sounds like I was trying to get together conflicting nations, but no, we met to talk about the Disney versus DeSantis kerfuffle. I've been keeping up with that a lot, as well as the various happenings. And so you can tune into that tomorrow once I am done editing. It does take up it's a pretty light episode, just me and Adair talking like two black dudes trying to figure out what's going on in the world.
All right. Well, check it out. The discourse, everybody. Do we have Matt Binder? Not yet? All right. Well, we'll head into the fun half. He can plug Doomed and Scam Economy, but check those out. Guys, also check out Leftist Mafia, which Binder does is it tonight? Thursday?
Yeah, I think so. Thursday night.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. I will be on a plane, but I will check it out later. We're going to head into the fun half again. The number is 646-257-3920. Please become a member, support this show. Actually, we do have Binder, so maybe we can have him in here right now. While we do that, we rely on your support to make this show run, to get us paid. It's nice to have some money in the bank. We appreciate it. Whatever you can do. We're up against right-wing media outlets that have billionaire benefactors.
Yeah, and don't have to micromanage advertising.
Yeah, and like we can barely get a bathroom that works. Gonna be honest with you guys.
Or elevators.
We can't afford the level of skits that
tough in this building. Yeah, what'd you say, Brandon?
We can't afford the level of skits that Steven Crowder is able to put together.
Exactly.
Gay Captain America, gay Superman.
If we could come up with those kinds of things if you become a member at jointhemajority.report.com. Support this show. Keep us independent, surviving, thriving, all that good stuff. Matt Binder, hello, friend.
Hello.
What's happening on Doomed and Scam Economy?
On this week's episode of Doomed, I had Lance of the Surfs on the show to talk about his appearance on, we had a little bit of I guess you could call it a pool party. Discussing our time on each of us on Tim Pool's show, and it broke down his recent appearance and how he knocked it out of the park, and just exchange sort of what our experience was in terms of how Tim Pool presents his arguments on the show. So check that out at youtube.com/Matt Binder. And at doomedcast.com, and got a new episode of Scam Economy coming out next week. The most recent episode on there was my discussion about what was going on with Twitter recently. So you can check that out at scameconomy.com. And yeah, that's it.
All right. Again, the number 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half, everybody.
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude,
Dude.
you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1 half. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
We are back. We are back. Just a quick break, guys. Do not panic. We are here. Here to do some clips. I'm turning off the voicemail. We are in the phones. There we go. Custodial artist. Okay, so first it was sexy candy, then gas stoves. Now you liberals are saying I can't spray poo in the air? What has happened to America? It's we did an interview earlier, you guys, about pollution from runoff. Kowalski from Nebraska, the I am I was waiting for here. I've read a lot about the southeastern United States being particularly bad for livestock production. Too much rain, so there's too much runoff. Geography-wise, you have